was born and grew up and did my studies in Los Angeles. And I also finished university not so long after the economic crisis. And I worked for a couple years in LA, but the general context was, let's say, kind of limited. Not a lot of quality architecture going on. There's not such a big culture in terms of clients or consumption. I think that in the end, a lot of arguments are made by economics and effectiveness and this kind of maybe post-rationalization of things you want to do. And in Europe, there's maybe a little bit deeper knowledge about like creativity and a kind of respect for creations.
And you have many significant projects. Maybe we could emphasize now the Nanshan Cultural and Sports Center in Shenzhen.
And it was hard for us to working in China as well, because especially because this fast-growing different scale completely. And what we, let's say, understood in Europe and we were talking about is that it's always a context. And always, let's say, especially when we're talking about cultural buildings are usually somewhere in the city, in the neighborhood, partly relying on nearby functions as well.
What's your approach when you're working projects in Asia? What's like the key difference from Europe to Asia?
Yeah, maybe just a quick background overall. I mean, luckily our project has grown a lot internationally. We have probably almost maybe 40% of our projects now are abroad. And originally it started in Asia, so we have a kind of affinity. So our first big project was in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Design Institute. And then we won a big project also in Shenzhen. So I was living in Shanghai. I helped open our office there and mainly following this project for almost 3 years. So I had a kind of nice let's say deep dive into the Chinese process. Me coming back, it kind of helped us to like revitalize our workflow in a bit, because you can't just be burning through time all the time with the unknown, so you become a little bit better and more flexible and kind of more efficient in a way. So I really like this kind of like confrontation of like workflow and worlds. Another one of like almost never-ending iteration. So in China, it's not like you work 3 months and there's one final thing. There's always going to be something that's not final because of, you know, the way maybe let's just say the government project team is, there's always someone else's boss and someone else's boss or someone else, some other department.
I just wanted to ask about your experiences at EXPO. You both were designing pavilions at EXPO. So what was your, maybe go us through the whole project and the idea, what was going on there in EXPO?
Yeah, for us, it's first time designing an expo, and first we thought that we have to forget everything that we think about architecture, because there is no context, no, let's say, society that we are built for. That's a temporary building that have to be, on the other, have to be very, very strong on narrative. But after that, we realize that if we forget everything that we know about architecture and how we let's say want to build something that connects to its environment, then we possibly can't create something that we are good at. So we at the end turn back to create something that has somehow connections with the neighborhood, which is very hard because we don't know nothing about, you know, we only know that who our neighbors will be, but what they do and how they do it, we don't know anything.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Sphere. Today we're here at Budapest, more specifically Corinthia Hotel, and we are visiting Graphisoft 2025 Ignite Conference. We are here to have discussions with our fellow colleagues, architects and other experts from various fields to discuss what is the future of architecture. More specifically, how the new technological developments influence architecture as a field, how it affects our role as architects, how it affects educational systems, cultural heritage, working processes, and so on and so forth. This will be a very fun and exciting project for us. This marks the start of our architectural podcast series. And if you want, be sure to check our links that will be there in the description of this video to check out what we did in the previous 2 years in the Serbo-Croatian speaking area. Once again, my name is Miljan Salata and welcome to the Sphere and the Ignite Conference. Let's go.
If you would like to hear more conversations, please check out the Ignite On Demand library located in the description of this video. Here you can discover inspiring lectures and in-depth panel discussions with architects and BIM experts from around the world.
Zoltán, Andras, welcome to the Sphere. Thank you for allowing us to visit Richter Headquarters and have these conversations. I would like to start from your personal backgrounds. I think you have obviously different backgrounds, but there are some similarities. You have various educational backgrounds, and you have visited many cities, even different continents. So maybe we can start from you. Can you tell us about your personal background and your architectural journey here?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So it's a kind of a long story how I became an architect. First, I wanted to be a sculptor. I really like to play with forms and a narrative, tell a story to art. But after a while, I realized that somehow the scale of sculptures and let's say the function and role in the society, something I want something bigger, something more meaningful, and slowly started to be interested in architecture. While I was studying sculpture, I was studying in pop art in Finland. When I lived in Hungary, being a sculptor is very handcrafted. I'm really working with my hands and working with materials and creating. So the creation. And when I went to Finland, I just started to learn the ways of digital creation. That's why I first used Rhino. It's Rhino, I don't know, 3 or something. So it was really kind of a long time ago. And when I turned to architecture and decided to go on studying architecture, I chose MOME. And there's 2 main schools in Hungary. One is more like engineering way of architecture, and another is more like applied art way of architecture. So I choose MOME, which is believes architecture as a kind of an art, so it's an art form, and I studied there. And since I became in love with Finland, when the opportunity came, I went back to Finland for a scholarship, studying interior design and furniture design, and about collaboration, because in Hungary you really study alone, so everything you have to do alone. But in Finland, I've learned how to cooperate, work with others. And when I came back, started to cooperate with other students from the university, industrial designers, package designers, graphic designers, so on. I started to enter into competitions, and please enjoyed this cooperation work and being a kind of motivator in these teams. And finished university. During the crisis in 2009, there was not much, let's say, space for architects, especially in Hungary. And I also feel that in this moment it's really handcrafted, old, very meaningful in many ways, but a little bit outdated way of architecture. I needed to learn the other side of architecture. Is more digital, more, let's say, up to date technically. So I went into the Netherlands to work for a while, and I worked with Kasselsterhuis and learned from him as much as I can about parametric design and non-standard architecture. But very soon, so it's about half a year, I realized that as a Hungarian in Netherlands, I can't be as successful than in my own country. So everything that I learned, let's say, kind of packed, came back to Hungary, and joined Gábor Zoboki at ZDA in 2010, and since that I'm working in the studio as a partner now, design director, and working in really, let's say, meaningful, mainly cultural projects.
Well, what would you say are the maybe key differences or similarities between those different, let's say, contexts? So what did you learn in one place, and what did you recognize in some other place, maybe?
So it's let's say, I would say that architects are still working in the same way, and creation is still the same that we did, I don't know, 100 years ago, and because as humans naturally changed. And what I learned in Hungary and experienced in Hungary during my studies is that as an architect, I'm a human. So first of all, I'm a human, and I see and I feel the surroundings around me, and I have to design in a way that I feel well in those spaces. Let's say with those handcrafted techniques, sketching, really making models with my own hand, I enjoy it. But that's, let's say, not effective enough. And had to in the Netherlands with CAS Studio, I learned how to let's say think a little bit more digital, because with architects we are using tools. So it's like any artist, like a sculptor or painter. But with the tools we are using, we're not really carving out from stone the artifact that we made at the end, but creating, let's say, a process, designing a process for others to build that kind of artifact that we imagined, or not we the big team. Creating an architecture is not a sole, let's say, the designer, sole artist. It's always a big team that to program, to design, and to build. So it's these tools what we're using really have a big effect on what we can do. And as long as we understand the pencil and how it works, the digital tools, and that's what I learned in the Netherlands and experienced with, is that we have to understand these tools, the logic of this generative design and parametric design, and how to use it as a tool and not as let's say, an aim. And if we understand these tools enough, how they are working, what other logic we need to apply when we are using them. So not changing how we create, but changing, let's say, the process that we create them. So sometimes I say that we now design through processes. So we design the process, and the process will design the building. Of course, it's not that black and white, but we have to understand how to use these tools as tools and not as aims. And then I can design through them and not let's say by them. So they are not let's say forcing me into direction. If I'm not familiar with the tool and I'm just using it for fun or something, then I'm really limited by the knowledge, how much I know about that tool. And that's basically this shift from, well, not basically shift, it's kind of a mix that I'm still using my hand and using the pencils and everything, but still using the digital tools, but for different things and with different, let's say, processes.
I want to go back to that topic later on. I want to give mic to Zoltán.
Sure, no problem.
But I think what you mentioned is very interesting in the sense that we're like our product is not artistic in the sense when we are designing it. Like sculpture is doing it one-to-one. He's already making it. Okay, maybe he's making some models, but it's very close to that scale. Our models are very abstract. Even when if you're doing like physical models, like they're just representations of a thing, it's not the thing itself. And I would say that there tools, as much as it gives you freedom, it also takes away your freedom. That's why I guess you need to have different tools.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zoltán, you were in LA, you studied in LA, then moved to Paris, and then I'm interested, like, what was your reason? Why did you make that decision?
Well, a kind of like similar but parallel story. So I was born and grew up and did my studies in Los Angeles. And I also finished university not so long after the economic crisis. And I worked for a couple years in LA, but the general context was, let's say, kind of limited. Not a lot of quality architecture going on. And one thing that I noticed was all of the kind of key buildings were usually done by foreign architects. So actually at that time, many of my colleagues or classmates were working in China. I think the early 2010s was a big boom of jobs in China. And because of my family background, I have a double citizenship with Hungary and part of the EU. So I thought I'd go the other direction and try to get some more design and cultural experience. At least from that perspective, it seemed like there was more high quality architecture projects, or at least expectations happening in Europe. And I thought to come to Europe and try to gain experience, especially as a younger professional. So I kind of by chance ended up going to France. And that kind of, started now I've been working not always in France, but kind of linked with France for about 15 years. So also there's many differences in mindset. And then from being based in Paris, actually our office So I joined in around 2012. There's a couple is a founding partners, and I joined them a couple years afterwards, and I kind of basically helped grow the international sector of our activity and portfolio. And part of that is also thinking about, what's different in different places and how to bring maybe like the best of, so every place is a little bit different. Somehow the profession is like a kind of common denominator in a way, and this kind of human experience, but how to actually make things and to try to bring the best of everything and back into our kind of like practice. So that's mostly what I've been doing.
You mentioned that there are some differences like in the design approach.
Yeah.
Would you say that like, as I understood, like maybe Europe has maybe a slightly stronger design culture? Why do you think that is the that is the case?
Yeah, I do. And I think, and I'm not an expert in education or pedagogy or any of that, but maybe my personal experience, I think that in the United States or maybe in the Americas in general, firstly, it's like a little bit more capitalistic and a little bit more, let's say, democratic. So in the end, the architecture or design, there's not such a big culture in terms of clients or consumption. I think that in the end, a lot of arguments are made by economics and effectiveness and this kind of maybe post-rationalization of things you want to do. And in Europe, there's maybe a little bit deeper knowledge about like creativity and a kind of respect for creation. So I think even though in the everyday life of the profession, I think even in Europe, you would say it's not so easy, but I think comparatively there's a little bit more space, and the fact that the government is governments in general are a little bit more involved, and there's public tenders that kind of go in a certain way. I think there's a little bit more structural support for quality architecture in Europe.
From the let's say from the state or from the local.
Yeah, the state, the city, even the community, the users. I think there's generally a framework that's a little bit more.
So this is question for both of you. You can answer in which order you like. But do you think there is a gap right now, a big gap, in the way our discipline functions and the system itself? And how do you think we can overcome these gaps? Obviously, there is always a gap, but I'm interested in your perspective from your projects and how you work. How do you perceive this gap, and how do you overcome it in your work?
First of all, that's quote from Gábor Zoboki, is the founder of the studio, but we really believe in this, and. So it's so this gap is of course is there, and it's kind of visible, but it's depending from it's different from country to country and from market to market. So we usually both kind of adopt to it and have to understand what the client wants. If we are talking about, let's say, the private market, there's always a very strong, let's say, vision about the client. What they want is usually concerned with profit, and the public projects are a little bit different. So we actually both adopt and resist these kind of let's say influences for us. So if with every project that we create, let's say let's talk about private projects, if we understand the client's main, let's say, goals, and we not harm them much, so we know exactly where is the fine line, trying to find out where's the fine line, how far we can go with, let's say, challenging their interest, and then build in our own architectural, let's say, intentions on urban intentions, because architects, of course, is a profession that we have to kind of serve those that want us to design a building for them. But on the other side, we are kind of protectors of the society. So we have to always bear in mind that what this building will be standing there for decades, and how these buildings, let's say, serve the community, not just the client. So for that, we have to push in with kind of protecting the interests of the client, but pushing in as much from the society's, let's say, interest, or what we feel the interest of the society into it as much possible. And during the process, we also kind of educate our clients. So there's always strong discussions, and try to make them understand that what good for the society, it might be good for the project, for the company, for the future, let's say reputation. With the public project, it's a little bit different. We are mainly working in the cultural field, and there as well we have way more leverage in what we do. So of course there is a kind of, let's say, political will that they want to build a new concert hall, and then we as an architects, we are starting from the programming, putting a project together. We are more serving the society than let's say someone's own interest. That's a big responsibility as well. So it's so we know that when we are building for the public, then we have to be, let's say, very sensitive, exactly, yeah. and somehow finding this fine line when we can serve both the functions but both the city as well, because architecture as a kind of an art form, I would say that with industrial design as well, reaching the biggest public. So it's whatever we do. For example, where we are here in Richter, we not only focus on what's happening inside. It's very important. It's what's happening inside and how it's work for the company and for the employees who are working here. But how it looks from outside, what it gives back to the city, what it does with its environment. So it's so here we can have let's say a big leverage in public project and in some let's say profit-oriented private projects as well.
I think what you said is very interesting, like almost like a motto or a tactic, like first challenge, and then find the space and then build into that. Zoltán, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that I think architecture as a profession, while there may be some differences in different places, we're kind of like caught between these two sides. On one hand, kind of like protector of the public, or like a almost provision of a public service, let's say, and then a kind of increasingly how do you say, like economic kind of situation, or like real estate as an asset in a way. I think even for the public, even though it's kind of like for the public good, there's always a politician's term under which it falls, and it's also an investment, maybe long term, by the state. So we're kind of caught in the middle. I think that, our approach, maybe a little bit similar, is somehow to try to find the best in both worlds, and always kind of like find not necessarily have battles, but kind of to bring about the best of every situation, and maybe show how investing in something that might look not obvious to an investor, and show them how that can add value long term, and how it could or add value for their reputation, or add value in other ways. And so somehow try to navigate all of that to get to something that we're hopefully comfortable with or proud of. But I would say that in a kind of like bigger, higher level, I hope that as a profession we can also somehow turn or adapt ourselves, because I think overall we're still kind of working on a model that's more or less changed. The details have that stayed the same. So the details have changed about what technology, what software, whatever, but overall our role has been more or less defined, I think, without much change for about 50, 70 years. And I think maybe as a profession, it's also time to think about what exactly we do and how we can secure our voice kind of in the value of decision making, kind of from beginning to the end, to kind of like continue to add value to the built environment. So that's
because you mentioned right now the position caught in the middle. I often think about this position where we kind of are mediators in the society, and I'm actually thinking, is it really our power to be in this kind of role where you can kind of present also the private interest, but also understand what is the public interest, what's like in the interest of the society? Is it actually our power, and like where is that leverage, like you mentioned? Is it something that you approach intuitively and understand that, okay, now I have to go follow this idea through, and even if I challenge more than I need to at this point? Or you look at in a way that, you know, you try to understand the client and then tell him, okay, if this is what you aim for, then this is how we can achieve it, and then maybe build on that?
I think it really depends from, let's say, from culture to culture. Mm-hmm. So it's so for example, with here at Richter, the client has a very, let's say, architecturally, they didn't have any kind of wishes what they want. They used us as well to find out what they can use. But if an architectural culture is let's say strong enough and has, let's say, trust in it, in the mainly the political, from political side, and then from the society as well, I think they really can be in this mediating position, because that's where, so it's sort of like a little bit like a conductor in an orchestra, but on the other from the other view, it's in a mediator in some kind of, I don't know, when this hostage yes. So because it's of course there are different approaches from architect to architect, and the market is really forcing architects to not to think as a kind of a protector of the society and the society's, let's say, interest, and that really depends from country to country. So in Hungary, if you're looking into the market, international investors bring way less money into the Hungarian market and leaving the money for a longer term here than let's say into Slovakia or to Poland, and that means that the quality what they're aiming for is kind of less. So we have, let's say, less how to say, opportunity to work with, and that divides the architectural profession. There are those who are really serving this kind of interest and still can create kind of good buildings, but that's always kind of profit-oriented, short-term kind of architecture that might look fancy, but not thinking about let's say the city, the environment. In the environment, I mean that the surrounding, where the building is placing in it. And there are those where, as you say, always challenging the client. So we are always challenging the client. They are, of course, that's from some parts a good strategy, some parts a bad strategy. We have clients that we can lose because of that, because they tell us what to do, and we said we can't do that. We want to do that, and then it's at the end. The funny thing is that at the end they are always happy that we convince them to do something better. Of course, there are big fights, and there's always a kind of value engineering in the end. But we are believing that if the building mass and how is it let's say situated in the environment, it's good enough, then we don't really care if they change the material from stones to concrete or whatever, because that's not really what matters. But there's usually these big fights, and we lose many clients because this kind of, let's say, attitude, because we already tell them that we are not right, and they are not happy. And actually, we are playing with their money, so we understand that they are not happy, but they have to.
But it's also responsible, right? I'm playing with your money in a way. I'm also responsible for what you.
And they are creating a company, making a building, and they're disappearing from the country, but we are staying here. So it's so we have to keep our face, and we are looking at that building to the rest of our lives. So we really want to create something that we can be proud of. We're not working on projects that we are doing it only for money. So because that's not how we feel. So it's small company, and working on projects that we are love to work. And there is every client that we are working with knows this kind of attitude, and that's let's say this limitations of their, let's say, open will with what we will do.
But maybe your question was about the role of like being in between the two. Actually, I don't, or the mediator or translator, let's say. I actually don't mind like if the profession kind of goes in this direction, because I think I mean, historically, or I guess originally it was like the master builder, right? Like the one craftsman who knew all of the trades. But I mean, things have gotten so complex. I feel now we're like essentially super generalists. I even really feel this like technical education standard, for example, that exists in the universities here, where architects also do their structure calculation. I don't see how. I mean, there's so people. All the technology and all the professions have become like so complex. I think it's impossible to really know everything well. But I think this role of like instead of like the master builder, maybe like the master storyteller. So you're like the architect can kind of keep all these ideas and narratives and like expertise all together into one kind of like cohesive picture. I think that this is, especially with like, you know, AI and all of these new technologies, I would rather have this role than, you know, just being able to make the calculation and sign the permit. I think that type of work can be easily automated and done and all of that, but our role and value can be more about this like more humanistic narrative city, you know, what are we doing kind of as a collective. I don't mind that kind of like mediator role actually. I call it mediator, but mediator I think is not only like balancing the two sides, but kind of collecting it and like give a direction in a way. So yeah,
but also wanting to also push his own, or let's say its
I think it depends on the people. I think so. So we do a lot of collaborative work, and I think the biggest fights come over like aesthetic preferences, where it's, you know, some people like, I don't know, black stuff and some people like red stuff, whatever, and then that it ends up being a kind of personal decision. But I feel like in a bigger, more complex scale, usually, let's say the client or the city or whomever, generally the ideas aren't incompatible, just they're focused on something else. So I think that it's not like we come in and we mediate and say, and this is like, you know, also our direction. I feel like that is somehow the creative thing of putting all these pieces and finding like a clear story. It can't just be like half of this and half of this and half of this, and then you have this like Frankenstein like result. You have to like really make the vision out of that stuff. And usually, at least in my experience, those stakeholders are happy that then it's part of a vision and not just a kind of like patch together something. So at least that's generally how we are working in these kinds of situations.
You just now mentioned the topic which I have here and I wanted to ask you about is architectural narratives in general. Why are they important, and what's the power of architectural narrative? You kind of already answered, but maybe Andras, you can tell me what you think about why these narratives are they kind of important for our own personal logic, like a guiding principle, or we can utilize it in a more broader sense?
I think it's both. So it's for me, it's starting as an artist. That's everything what we do is have to have a reason. It's the same with architecture. So it's if there is if you find for every project we have to create build up a very clear narrative for two reasons. One is that if there is a clear narrative, then everything can be kind of aligned to that. So it's a kind of a direction that's where we want to go, and when we have doubts and questions, that we can always take back to that. And of course, the narrative can evolve and with the project, but that's a kind of a guideline for us. Another thing is that humanity is a literate, let's say, culture. We are literate species. So it's if we can describe something, we can tell the story of something. We are just as for example, Harari says it that we are became who we are because we can tell the story and can believe in story, and that's for me a narrative. So it's every project has a strong narrative and it's clear enough, and they don't have to explain it for the public. So it's well, let's say, crafted, and the building can let's say very clearly demonstrates it, that's something that the people the public can remember for that. Not because it's a nice facade, because it's made for whatever, or it functions well. That's all very important. But this narrative is the one that's somehow glues everything together into one not physical, one
or maybe coherent
something artifact. So
architecture today is shaped by more than buildings. It's shaped by ideas, tools, as well as people who connect them. That's why we invite you to register for Graphisoft Ignite Conference On Demand Library. Here you can discover inspiring talks by leading architects and BIM experts, real projects, real workflows, and real conversations about the future of design. Registration is free, and the knowledge stays with you. Follow the link in the video description, sign up in just a few simple steps, and explore the ideas shaping contemporary architecture through BIM, emergent technologies, and advanced workflows.
Can I ask a question also?
Yeah, of course.
And for you, this narrative, is there like different types of a narrative? Is it always like maybe conceptual or formal, or how are you working? And the narrative be, I mean, technical or urban? I mean, are there multiple narratives? Is there one? How do you see it?
For me, for VR project, every project has kind of one narrative. So what's strong in it, an urban part or a functional part, or the story it tells, or how it looks, or how it's so what it's always depending from project to project. So let's say here the narrative is completely different in Richter Center. Here the narrative is that this is one of Hungary's leading international company whose success is based on research, and research is for research you need creativity and how to say, not rigidness, what's the right word, when you are following rules and applying it correctly. So that's what we, as a building, that's what we wanted to represent in many ways. Of course, then there are kind of sub-stories into it, how cooperation works and things like that. So here was that, but when we designed the Hungarian pavilion for the Osaka EXPO, there's a narrative, partly came from an artistic team, and then we built an architecture narrative on it, how folklore can be turned into architecture, and how landscapes are represented in folklore songs, and how can we build kind of building on this kind of narrative landscapes, narrative landscape. So for us, it's usually one very strong kind of guideline that's whenever we can tell the story of that building. And if it's not kind of feelable on the building, that's not say visible, because sometimes it's not a visible thing. It can be touched, smelled, felt, I don't know. But so if it's not, it has to be explained for the people. That obviously doesn't work. So it's
I think in a way architecture is abstract, and we kind of have to use these tools. I remember one example. I worked in some international offices, and I remember one example where we designed something and then went back to the narrative, and almost we didn't touch on the building. We just reinvented the whole narrative, and the whole team just there was an order not to do anything on a computer for like a month, and they were just drawing, and it was a fascinating process, because we could all see it in there was one room with the glass, and we can all see just pictures and drawings coming together. Obviously some things changed, but I was amazed. It was my first realization that but they didn't change nothing, and it felt at first like a lie. But then after some years passed, I kind of understood why it was important. It's not that the clients didn't like the design, they just didn't understand it maybe correctly, and they kind of needed this metaphor of why this and how is it connected to their own narrative of their own company or brand.
And it has to be meaningful. So it's for example, if you're just talking about kind of sustainability, if you're looking at it not in a traditional way, but if we create something that's meaningful for the society in a long term as well, then it means that this building can stand there and use their function, or maybe adopt with the time. But if it's missing this narrative, this storytelling that links back to the society and for people's let's say emotions, then the long-term use of the building is a kind of a question. Maybe I'm very strong in that because we are mainly working on public project and culture project, and they always have to be stronger, I think, in this side than or even a headquarter than, let's say, a speculative office building or a housing project for that part. Cultural buildings is very important.
So we have to make a little pause here because the daylight is going down, so we have to turn on the lights. But I think it's a nice intro for the conversation about Richter Headquarters, which you already mentioned a couple of times. And maybe you can expand on the architectural narrative here. What was your main driving principle or the concept during this process of designing?
I have to go back a little bit of time. Richter is one of Hungary's three main, let's say, international companies, and they started the operation here in this area more than 120 years ago. And we started to work with them 20 years ago when they bought this part of the let's say, the plot. There is a big road ahead of us, and it's divided the Richter site into two parts. And they bought it 20 years ago, about a little bit more than 20 years ago, and they asked us to do a master plan for that because they want to renew the whole area, let's say, making operations and manufacturing, taking out from this site and creating more work-friendly, more green areas here. So we created this master plan, and in this master plan, we laid down the foundations at how this geometry that's separating the two sides, which is actually leading to the airport, will turn into a very longer time, let's say in 50 years, into a kind of an alley. It's almost pedestrian alley that linking the city into the airport and be a kind of a main connecting force in this area. There's many let's say big manufacturing areas and office centers here. And after master plan, we designed the research center. And about 6 years ago, they asked us to redo the master plan because things have changed, and they want to build the headquarters as a next building. So at the end, it turned out that our research center and headquarters will be next to each other, and then we had the opportunity to kind of create this first urban step here when we are stepping back from the street, creating an urban park in front of the building, and connecting the two buildings and actually finishing all those functions, putting all those functions into the new building that's missing from the research center. When I started to work with them, they're ideal clients. They don't have any architectural wishes. They tell us how they operate. We had many interviews with them to find out how they would work in this place. Before that, they worked in this typical cellular office things, and now here they move in a semi-open office area. So it's a big cultural change for them as well. So at the end, together for long conversation, discussions about what. If they build a headquarters, that will have to be meaningful. There is a reason for that, and they have to stand for something. And we ended up with 3 words that the building have to let's say show or have to stand for. One is innovation. Another one is modesty. We get some kind of complaints about that, and the third one is functionality. So this building have to represent this innovation, how the company became one of the leading research pharmaceutical company in the region. Have to represent that modesty, that although they are one of the biggest Hungarian company, they are not building skyscrapers or whatever, but they are building a modest scale of building, and it have to function seamlessly. So this have to serve the workers who are working here. And our main idea was that to follow what we started at the research center. This research center is made from an office building and from our research laboratories, and a big, let's say, sculptural staircase connecting the two, representing the connection of these different functions and creating a space for people to meet and to interact with each other. We basically follow the same idea here. We created a longitudinal building with an atrium in the middle. This looks like a like a terraced how say cavity when there is in this stone the rocks there is this
like a cavity.
Yeah, exactly,
cavity,
like a cavity, and that's basically this vertical connection with staircases, with terraces that connects the two parts of the building, and it creates a community. So it's everything which is let's say community functions, restaurant, buffet, meeting rooms, and from here we can enter into a kind of conference center that links the two buildings. So the research facility and this building are in around this main atrium in the ground floor levels. And when we are going upstairs into these stairs, there's always let's say communal functions like informal meeting places, meeting rooms, and things like that. And then we enter into the end of the buildings with more and more quieter. While the end of the buildings are there when you really want to be in quiet and be with your own and working, let's say, alone quietly, you can go there. So it's a very strong communal sense in the building, and we always prefer staircases over elevators because that's where people meet. So it's and these chance meetings, of course, there's a say that the elevator speech is very important, but we say that these meetings, chance meetings by the staircase when we are moving between levels is also very important. That can be a catalyst of new ideas and connections. And we're representing with the facade the same thing. So it's the very open ground floor and first floor with all these meeting and community functions. And above that there is these office areas. They are semi-covered with a unique shading system around the building. And these shading systems wanted to represent the behavior of research, because there are different shading lamellas. There's no two similar one, but there's a very strong logic between them. How this cavity, what you say?
Cavity, yeah.
How this cavity go through the atrium from one side of the building to another side, and when they are meeting with the facade, they are starting a ripple on the facade, and that ripple goes all around. So it's from looking from far away, it's basically one strong mass on a very open, glassy ground floor. But when we are getting close together, we can see this ripple effect all around the facade. That's representing this new ingenuity of research when there is it's creativity, but there is a very strong logic in it. So we can't change one lamella alone. There is this parametric logic that if we do something at one point that has effect in the other lamellas, they are fixed lamellas and not moving or anything. But this ripple effect that's basically turning this building into a sculpture from far away, because this heavy mass standing on this glassy bottom.
What you touched on several very interesting topics, and first of all, you mentioned the master plan and this kind of urbanistic logic that you started the project with. And I would maybe ask Zoltán to expand on that, because I know your background is on urbanism, if I'm correct.
A little bit, yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, how important do you think it is for architects to have that, let's say, space for creativity, or to just, even if they're creating just particular architecture, have that context and have that urbanistic approach in mind? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I arrived to architecture maybe the opposite way as András. So like came from the sculpture side, and I came more from the
two completely different skills.
From the city side, and originally thinking about cities and maybe like civil engineering or I don't know what, and then saying like actually, but it's a lot of like law and paperwork and this kind of thing, and how to get to something kind of more creative but still have that impact. And somehow I think all architects in a way arrive in this middle point somehow. But I think for us, and I mean for me personally, and also our office's approach, I mean we're based in France, so even though we're like international, there's some kind of tendencies to how even how the architectural system is in France, and this urban component is incredibly important. So even like a public project or a private project always starts as part of like a strategic framework and then like a neighborhood plan, and there's kind of layers and layers. So even if we're not necessarily drawing those, we read all these documents and it's somehow like ingrained into our kind of approach. So for me, I think it's incredibly important, and kind of also linking back to this storytelling aspect, because ideally the story of the project is not, you know, kind of like excluding everything that's around it, but somehow linked to the neighborhood, but especially I would say for me like people's lives. So people's lives and their kind of like everyday experience is not isolated here, but kind of like a connecting sequence of spaces, whether it's by car or by bus or bike or whatever, by foot, with everywhere else they are in the city. And so somehow it's important that the architectural, I mean the isolated architectural narrative and kind of concept is supporting, let's say, and fitting into the rest of it. So
yeah,
I think that's important.
And actually, so it's, if you're thinking about building is one thing, but there's always negative space between the building.
Yeah.
That's what we really build. So it's when we are doing a building, we are creating the space
The empty
next
space.
to it, the empty space next to it, and that's even at least as important for the city-wise is more important than the building, what happening inside the building. So it's that thing that what the peoples of the let's say that not the users of each building, but the neighbors and the society, citizens feel when they are walking through the city. It's really building can help to build up a kind of a connection with the city and an identity. So it really helps to build up who they are and how they are connecting to the city, not to mention their visual culture and spatial culture.
I think, at least in my perspective, or what we do in the office, we are also try as much as possible to have that storytelling aspect, let's say from the facade or whatever, for the neighborhood, so that it's as simple as possible, so that, you know, even if you're walking by and you don't know anything about the building and you didn't hear anything, you didn't go to like the community presentation, you still can start to have some feeling about what is the story of this building. So it communicates even on a very basic level something to everyone. Then for us, that's like the most successful architects, not hidden in 50 pages of like kind of complex conceptual whatever, but something really tangible and
more
humanist.
immediate. For example, I don't know if we can see that behind, but we maybe put some cover shots. But one of my first impression, if I may, was like the entrance and like the whole space and the connection with the street and with the whole context. Obviously, this is a very industrial area, and these buildings sort of are kind of accents in the space, if I use the correct word. But it reminded me of a discussion we had with Riki Yamamoto, and who a Japanese Pritzker Prize winner, and we discussed particularly on this topic of like this in-between boundary space in his work, and how these spaces are more and more endangered, and how actually his whole work revolves around finding that gap, finding that gap when, like you said, building up in that gap and trying to find these in-between spaces that are in between public and the private. And that is the main driving impetus, let's say, for his ideas. Do you, when you're presenting your ideas at first to your clients, do you immediately try to emphasize and build narrative on that? Or sometimes you try to, conceal it and just like maybe start from, I guess it depends, obviously. But I'm interested in because we come from different contexts, and I'm just interested of, are clients interested in hearing this story about, oh, I want to make this very nice for the neighborhood and this is good for the society, or you trying to maybe sell the idea, let's say sell or present the idea, come from a different approach and then maybe finish on that?
Yeah, it depends on the client and things. So it's when we are working a cultural project and we're working with, let's say, the programming with artists and so on, they are of course way more interested in the story of the building, and sometimes clients as well. I mean that in private projects. But as you I think it's in the question as well. There are certain clients that we can't start with that because they don't give a shit to say, and the end they might. So it's, of course they are important when we go for the municipality or decision makers. Then they're interested in the story as well, but they don't really interested in the story. They're not unhappy if we make a story, but they are very interested about the facts, about how let's say profitable will it be for them. That's the what we are working with. That's the fewer of the clients are like this. So we are usually start with the narrative and with the functionality of the building. So it's how well it will function, how well it will serve them, and what the story that the building can tell. And very often we find the narrative together. So it's putting it together. So we are most. And actually, our working methodology, so we are a very general office, but most of the projects we are working on the beginning. So we are doing the programming together, finding the narrative together, that architecture design, and go until, let's say, the permit plans or something like that. And then we do, let's say, detailed design for the most interesting parts, but usually work with partners who are continue with, let's say, developing the plan. So we are really focusing on the first parts, and that's what we really enjoying. So it's most of the time starting with the narrative.
I mean, just to add on to that, I would say even though it depends on your audience, let's say, I think it's generally beneficial to have a set narrative. I mean, as soon as you can, and then depending on your audience, either it's one sentence or a long description, but you're kind of like abridging it. I would say also, I think you mentioned a bit, it's maybe one of the main factors is that usually the design process, ourselves, I mean, it's not like a linear process where we have an idea and this is the story and then we come up with a concept. So sometimes it kind of flips back and forth, or like you're working on different layers, and then eventually it kind of all comes together. So because we're professionals and do it a lot, we can we can start to have an object and know that there's a narrative in there that will, we can develop, or it can happen the other way around, where we have a strong narrative that we see as good potential to also solve the physical problem. So it's not always happening in the right way. But the sooner you can get it, then it's also easier to kind of anchor everyone around whether they're more interested in the investing side of it or maybe the urban aspect. So
yeah, it's a little bit like when we are making these first sketches at the end of the project, and we are really knowing what it's really about, and we can very nicely sketch it.
In 3 lines.
It's 3 lines, but we can do it at the beginning because we are really, that's Zoli says, as we build up this narrative, we are changing to that process, and the building changes process, and redesigning and redesigning and redesigning. So it's in this way, let's say, what that type of architecture, what we do is, let's say, not always financially, let's say, worth it. So we are kind of our own enemies financially, because we could do it in straight line. The clients want us what to do. We design it, create a narrative, do the building, they design the building, and then happy say hello. But we are constantly redesigning it, and as a narrative kind of evolves, the design evolves, and it's with all the conversation with clients, partners, then came the constructors. So it's always adds something to the project, and we have to reconsider a bit that what we had before. But it's very important that the main goal. So if you start to go into one direction, that we not turn around, we go less or more that direction, just fine tuning it as new, let's say, inputs arise.
I want to kind of jump to a different continent now, to Asia, since we started talking about culture and cultural projects and multifunctionality. And you have many significant projects. Maybe we could emphasize now the Nanshan Cultural and Sports Center in Shenzhen.
Yes, so it's I would say multifunctionality and adaptability. I will talk what I feel the difference between the two, and it was hard for us to working in China as well, because it's especially because this fast-growing defense scale completely. And what we, let's say, understood in Europe and we were talking about is that it's always a context, and always, let's say, especially when we're talking about cultural buildings are usually somewhere in the city, in a neighborhood, partly relying on nearby functions as well. In China, it's not the case. If you build something, it has to be, let's say, it have to include everything, because there is no, let's say, nearby functions that can let's say support it or help it. And it was with this National Culture Center as well. We get into the project that they already started to build the project, and they visited Hungary, visited many European countries, let's say urban examples and so on, and they went to MIPA, and they really was the Place of the Arts in Budapest, and they really let's say liked it. And when they visited, they had started to have the doubts that what they're doing in Nanshan district in Shenzhen, it's right or not, and visited our office and sent us plans, and we had many, let's say, suggestions how to do it differently. Gabor Zoboki went there, and in a 2-hour meetings convinced let's say, the political decision makers of the city that what they're doing is wrong, and we know how to do it right. So they stopped the construction and commissioned us to kind of redesign the whole building from the foundations. Foundation was there, and in a multifunctional building works in a way that have to create, let's say, constant all around the day activities in a building, because if a building is kind of half dead during the day or during the night or whatever, then it's not as appealing for people. So it's a little bit working, as we understand, like living rooms. So it's people go for there not just for the functions inside. And in this case, putting so there were this let's say cultural center, performance center, sports center, and museum, and sports center and the cultural center or the performance center are we created one big roof encircling kind of a square and putting these two functions next to each other, a big little gap between them, but under one roof, and wanted to create a form, let's say, mass that from outside somehow can be in league with all these big megastructures around it. So that's why we connected all those into under one really big sculptural roof. But for the inside, it was very important for us to create, let's say, human scale. So it's such size of the halls and such interior and such spaces that helps with the intimacy. But on the other side, it has to be, let's say, a public building enough, so not for cultural lovers only. Because what we have, let's say, in Budapest or in Europe, that's a very strong, let's say, performing art section with the performance artist and with the audience as well. But in China, at that time especially, neither really existed. So we have to build a building that builds up. It's, let's say, it's like cultural life, and for that we have to create such a multifunctional, let's say, adaptable building that can host a big variety of different kind of activities, from concerts to operas to theaters to corporate events. So we created a concert hall that was basically attached to an opera stage. And we created such an adaptable hall with moving ceilings that it can really modify the volume and the acoustic let's say, qualities of the space. Next to it, we designed a children's theater. They wanted to create a cinema next to it, but there are many cinemas, so we thought that even for children, even these huge kind of concert halls are really huge. So we wanted to create an even more intimate space for younger generation to get to know the performing art. So it's really about intimacy in the interior, and let's say somehow adapting the scale, this massive scale of the nearby skyscrapers and urban masses from the outside. So it's being kind of visible and to link to this environment.
Yeah, I think main takeaway is, like, even if you have like difficult context, let's say difficult, or it seems like there is no context there, it still influences the project. Like, you still have to create. If there is nothing around, you try to create something. Zoltán, what's your approach when you're working projects in Asia? What's like the key difference from Europe to Asia?
Maybe just a quick background overall. I mean, luckily, our project has grown a lot internationally. We have probably almost maybe 40% of our projects now are abroad. And originally it started in Asia, so we have a kind of affinity. So our first big project was in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Design Institute. And then we won a big project also in Shenzhen. So I was living in Shanghai. I helped open our office there and mainly following this project for almost 3 years. So I had a kind of nice, let's say, deep dive into the Chinese process. And now it's a little bit less of a main part of our portfolio, and we've able to springboard that into a kind of like more global, not fully global, but I mean kind of around Europe, a little bit in Africa, Middle East, kind of global activity. But we really learned a lot from that Chinese context, and I think it is still, but I mean it was really very special for and very fast for about 10 years. So, but I think they basically had a huge amount of urban development in the last 20, 30 years. And because of the way their kind of government and economy is organized, there's a lot of like big strategic plans that actually get realized, I mean, from beginning to end, because because basically the government can put together a plan and then they kind of like follow through very quickly. And which means there were projects like cultural centers, so they said, statistically our population will be this, and the zoning is like this, and we need to reserve the space, which in a way is good, reserve the space for culture or civic communities kind of around, but it's not yet 100% sure exactly who will use them, and all of that kind of like cultural infrastructure or maybe societal infrastructure, let's say, has not yet developed, but they're kind of like planning ahead. So it's a very interesting context, and I think what I liked about it is it makes us kind of like really challenge what we know and try to be creative and really come up with like good ideas based on the information that we know. I can't say, I mean, if you compared it to a French project. So our main project in Shenzhen is a public art center, which has a museum, contemporary art gallery, and a kind of community culture space, which has a small theater, but mainly music rooms and classrooms and this kind of thing. And if this was in France, there would be maybe a few hundred pages documents that says all the programming studies of exactly what you need and everything. And here it was more like, okay, we want something like this, and help us to define what it should be and what's the best way that it should work. So I think it's also a good exercise in creativity and kind of proactivity, especially compared to Europe or France, where it's become now, after so much time, kind of standardized and bureaucratic, and that in that kind of context in China, you can really think like, what do we know and what like benefit or plus value we can add to what we think they're going to do. And like you said, Gabor, who came and said, actually, you should do something in a completely different way. And same with our project in Shenzhen, we created a kind of vertical campus that was more open instead of just a kind of big black box inside of which stuff happens. So yeah, it was an opportunity to be kind of innovative and think about things in a new way.
How long have you been present in, let's say, the Chinese market? For how many years? What was your like first initial project in Asia?
Our first project was this Nanshan Culture Center. So it started in around 2007. So it's actually, for the company, it really helped to go through this crisis of 2008 and now, because we are working in China. But after that, since we are having, so it's that was the biggest build project that we have. We have several services since. So for example, just as Zoe said, there's very few, let's say, standards for such cultural projects. We had one of our commission was to redesign or find new functions for I think 6 of these kind of buildings that they built without good programming, and they can't use for anything. So they're standing there, big mega structures, cultural functions without any kind of activity because because they designed in a way that what who designed it have no knowledge about that, and there were no one in the system who could tell them that, hey guys, maybe it's not working, so they built it and they not use it, and they are just getting to almost think about to demolishing it or do something with it to make it useful. And
I wanted to ask you about how do you think the situation changed in Asia and China? Because I remember back in the days when I was thinking of going to Asia, there was this openness towards European architects, and a couple of my friends and colleagues that went back from China said like the situation has changed drastically. Obviously there are many great offices in China popping up all over the place, and they're kind of trying to rely on their own, let's say, societal forces.
They learned a lot, no?
Yeah.
So it's.
I think there's like a couple reasons. One is, I think, my interpretation, again, I'm not an expert, but I think that already they have a kind of like culture of you learn from the master and then you adopt the skills. So I think that like part of their, let's say, 30-year their development strategies on all sectors was to kind of learn from the world and slowly increase their abilities, which I think they've done. And there's some incredibly talented Chinese architecture firms who are now, I almost want to say young, but now they're not even so young anymore. I mean, they maybe graduated already from like Harvard GSD 20, 30 years ago, and now have like really significant, important practices. I think that's one. Second, I think is basically these economic factors. So from COVID on, there was like a huge first the COVID lockdowns, and then the Chinese real estate kind of bubble deflated, and so now there's much less opportunity for international competition. So it's kind of a different scene than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That's definitely sure.
Yeah, very much. And it's for us, at least, I don't know how it was you, but operation in China is really different for us than in Hungary. So they look at us as kind of design, I don't know, directors, or giving them design ideas, giving them special knowledge. But of course, there were very strong partners who actually did the plans themselves. So we there went them and helped with the narrative, helped with the special knowledge that we have about theater technology and programming of such a building, and as designers. But most of the work they did themselves, and they are there were a big boom of competitions during COVID. That was the last one that we know, and that's when we know each other. Is that for nothing from that is built for the, I don't know, 40 years of anniversary or 50 of Shenzhen. They wanted to build 10 big cultural complexes, and none of them built. That was big competitions, international competitions, and even that. So when there's a competition, they are looking for kind of how to say design architects. So it's not for the whole package, for a small package. Of course, that's the kind of paying well, but the majority of the work would be done by local teams anyway.
There's also a little bit of a kind of branding factor. I think also to have like an internationally designed project is also kind of part of the thing. And I think over time, originally, someone, let's say Western, was like, or foreign, because there's some Japanese architects also in China, was already good, and now that so much has been done there, now it's become, I mean, like Europe or the US, where these high ones, they want just the Pritzker winners. So the kind of like filter has been raised a little bit.
QR projects, so they're really selecting the top. And so it's branding, so they really need the
But I can say, I mean, besides that, one thing that I learned from being there that I adapted into our kind of office work. So first things were very fast. So you have to like really be flexible and adaptable. I think compared to like a typical French or German office, I mean, it's like another world. You don't know exactly the duration of the project and exactly the deliverables. You really have to work in a different way and kind of like embrace the unknown a lot. And for me coming back, it kind of helped us to like like revitalize our workflow in a bit, because you can't just be burning through time all the time with the unknown, so you become a little bit better and more flexible and kind of more efficient in a way. So I really like this kind of like confrontation of like workflow and worlds. Another one of like almost never-ending iteration. So in China, it's not like you work 3 months and there's one final thing. There's always going to be something that's not final because of, you know, the way, maybe let's just say the government project team is, there's always someone else's boss and someone else's boss or someone else, some other department. So you always have to be ready for kind of like change, which means you shouldn't work too deeply on anything. I mean, you should always expect that there's going to be something. So this too, this kind of like small cultural adaptations and knowing what the expectations are and kind of like going with the flow, I think is I like this kind of confrontation of procedures.
Did you have some important lessons from Asia that you took away and just applied here in Europe?
The cooperation. So it's before that we were really an office working in our own. So it's of course within the office there's a way how we cooperate with each other. But working abroad or working in your own, let's say, neighborhood, it's big let's say difference. Especially if we are talking about meaningful cultural projects that really add to that society, and how to get connected with people who are so, let's say, so far away from you. So we are not living in China, we not really had an office in China, but we still had to build something that's meaningful for them, functioning for them, they are happy with it, and how to team up with other, let's say, local architects in a way that they are partners of us, and not we tell them what to do, because if you just tell them what to do, the product won't be good at the end. So it's that kind of cooperation is helped a lot, and then we build it back into our operations in Hungary as well. And now we are trying to let's say focus more in the regional and more European market. That kind of knowledge of how to work together with others to put the best together and understand what we are good at, and understand what our limitations are, and how to put together let's say ideal team. That's what we learned. At least what I felt that added the most to our let's say working processes.
Since we are talking about Asia and Asian projects, before we bring our conversation to a closure, I just wanted to ask about your experiences at EXPO. You both were designing pavilions at EXPO, so what was your, maybe go us through the whole project and the idea what was going on there in EXPO. I'm also asking, it's interesting because we also have like a specialized exhibition in Serbia right now going next year. We'll see how that goes. Not so good right now, but we'll see. Like what is like your perspective on this? I call it like the real EXPO exhibition.
Yeah, for us it's first time designing an expo, and first we thought that we have to forget everything that we think about architecture, because there is no context, no, let's say, society that we are built for. That's a temporary building that have to be, on the other, have to be very strong on narrative. But after that we realize that if we forget everything that we know about architecture and how we let's say want to build something that connects to its environment, then we possibly can't create something that we are good at. So we at the end turn back to create something that has somehow connections with the neighborhood, which is very hard because we don't know nothing about, we only know that who our neighbors will be, but what they do and how they do it, we don't know anything. So we started to focus on the narrative, and that's what EXPO is good at, is that you can really, let's say, focus on that, because that's the whole EXPO is for us. It's like a Disney park or something. So it's not real architecture on one part. On the other part, we create something that will represent our country, and because that's representing our country, there is way more forces want to tell us what to do than an average building.
Want to point the narrative.
Exactly, and that this is really our part was this mediator part, and being able to somehow create something that we are architects kind of happy with, and still there are clients happy with, the public will be kind of happy with. So that was a big challenge, and not to mention the time constraint. So it's have to be built very quickly, very efficiently, and will be demolished start to demolish it in very soon. So that was difficult. So it's in the Hungarian pavilion is about the main idea was that we not want to, let's say, create an exhibition, but to create emotional connection bond with the people visiting the expo. Most of the visitors will be was Japanese, so it's or from the South Asian region.
Which I would say is a bigger pressure because Japanese architectural culture is like over the top in every sense. Yes,
but that's the architecture culture and average people. I think there is a big gap between them, and even architecture there is a big gap between the star architects and the architects, for example, we are working with. You are really rule-following architects, and we had, of course, we are kind of very happy that we have worked with them. That it was pain in the hell to go through all these regulations that they really wanted to follow, and at the end it turned to be that it will be in an exhibition of Japanese products, but managed not to do. So it's so create a project that create emotional bond between basically Japanese people and Hungarian people. So we looked for, let's say, similarities in the folklore and the culture, and find that this pentatonic scale of folk songs are the base for both culture. So the main attraction in our pavilion is a show when a live musician sings a 7-minute long show, and we created a paths that kind of leads into that show, that build up emotionally for you for this performance, and then leads out. For that we created a kind of an urban structure within this very, very narrow, and I don't understand why this narrow plot, and we used the landscapes that are very often in both in the Japanese and the Hungarian folklore songs. That's a forest which is let's say wide and dark and maybe even dangerous. The meadow, which is open, sunny and protective and welcoming. And we created a cupola form, which is representing a haystack. When people arrives into nature and start to turn it into his own, let's say, shape. And from these three elements, we created a building which includes a restaurant and conference centers. And so the conference center is a big word, so it's a conference room or meeting room, and this restaurant and this meadow that leads up into this haystack, and then people go into this meadow under the meadow, and then follow that path that leads into this show. And so the whole thing is to create this emotional bond, and being there and seeing people. So at the end of the show, the singer invites people to hum together this Hungarian folklore song, and of course, depending on that who is the actual audience, 70 people can be there at the same time. They really start to hum it and go out and can hum the song. And it's really moving. That's I'm not very sensitive in that way, but we are in tears when we are hearing this 70 people, that 60 of them are usually Japanese, singing Hungarian folklore music. So they are really, really connecting, and what's made to this narrative and how this emotional connection works, that many feedbacks we get that they are really remembering the Hungarian pavilion with this real life experiment.
I would just like to add a point there, because you were mentioning this emotional connection, and it's very interesting. You were looking at into like national traditions, and I just remembered recently we had a podcast about that in Serbian pavilion this year, which was really smart and entertaining and very emotional in the same sense, where they kind of transposed our more general tradition of knitting, and it was basically a pavilion of a huge net in the space, and people reacted in a very immediate sense because they recognize it. Their grandmothers used to knit, and and it's like cross-cultural, and I think it's very moving also, like you said. And they had the same comment, like they were moved by when people started recognizing something. Yeah. Zoltán, what was your approach when you were?
Yeah, for us as well. So we designed the French pavilion, and it was also our first time ever being involved in World Expo. So we learned a lot, but one of the things I think that, so I guess there's common things in Expo, it's every 5 years, so there's probably common things and maybe misconceptions. Us too, we went into it thinking of it almost like a museum or something, or making a temporary cultural venue, but it's much more complex with all the stakeholders, because it really goes into not just an architecture message or a user message, but there's a kind of political message and the relations between, you know, France and Japan, and which site they got and what they want to say there, and who is maybe sponsoring certain parts. And so there's a very, very complex like mediation thing. And then a story that's even the narrative that's given. So ours, for France, the architecture and the scenography was separated into kind of like two connected or parallel kind of like design procedures. So we basically won the competition to do, let's say, the box or the container, and then halfway through the competition, then we start to know a little bit about what's the theme. So the theme of France was, they called it a hymn to love. So it was about love and about like different interpretations already, like between France and Japan, and between people themselves, and for oneself, and humans and nature. So kind of different interpretation, and we designed a kind of a theater, let's say, that became a stage for like human interaction. But it was all very interesting. But I think maybe there was a few things. One, learning about Expo and all these different forces that make it very complex. I think that even if you've done an Expo before, at least what I heard from the people we worked with is that every context is different, and so working in Japan is extremely different than working in China, and there's a kind of adherence to strict procedure and rules which almost made anything getting built there impossible, where they had to make like a kind of special rules to bypass to be able to get things done in time. So it was a kind of like long, I think, learning process for everyone, but also very interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned making special rules, because right now Expo in Serbia is critiqued a lot because of, you know, bending the rules, and obviously there's suspicion of corruption and so on and so forth. But which is obviously legitimate, but also I think there is a point there to be taken that yes, it's very hectic, and you need to make a huge exhibition, and you sort of have to bend some rules.
Maybe just one thing I forgot to say. One of the most exciting things about it, though, is that you're sure that the building will like be open at a certain time. So compared to like other projects where, I don't know, maybe it's going to get delayed or whatever, even if there might be some sacrifices or cutting corners on some details in the end, it's like 100% sure it's going to be built. We'll have photographs, and it will be at least a finished project, and not, you know, kind of floating in the political space for a year or 3 years. So this was quite
Is
exciting.
it more satisfying or more stressful? Like,
no, more satisfying. I mean, we, at least from we've had in the last 5 years at least 3 or 4 huge, incredible competitions won that eventually the projects don't get done, and that's like a very draining process. I mean, sometimes financially, but emotionally. So it's nice, like, to actually get something realized all the way. It's a kind of like satisfaction. So this is I mean, it's stressful. I think mostly stressful for the builders, because at that point we're not so much in the picture. I mean, in kind of a high level, but satisfying that it actually gets done. And
But actually, but on the other hand, that's, you know, we are usually used to that. We are visiting a building during build and so on, and being there and selecting the materials and so on. So being more involved here, because of the quickness of the project and the regulations, the availability of materials, and availability of let's say workers who can work on the project. They have to redesign many times. material structure, so on, and we can't be there as much as we wanted. But whatever, so it's the nice thing in architecture, whatever bad will happen, the architect will be blamed on.
Yeah.
So and there we have a little bit more, let's say, effect that we on the side can do for the project.
I almost feel an urge to ask one more question, although my colleague will kill me because we are late for the Ignite conference, Graphisoft. But maybe just like a point or like your opinion to kind of conclude, what makes building truly public and lasting in people's memories?
So one thing is that we talked a lot about narrative. So if there is let's say that the narrative and the atmosphere of the building is right, so it's really touches you, and it's really you can remember for the story the building tells, and you feel right inside the building or around the building. That's for, at least for me, that's the building I remember for. It's not really how it looks and so on, but these two factors is the most important for me. And for truly public is that I think it's openness. So it's with every building we focusing on it that it adds at least as much to the public as it's let's say its own users, and we can see many examples around the world when peoples are built in a way, and that's why we remember them, and that's why it's important for the community, because they communicate with and giving space back, whatever back to the community. So it's really inviting and opening, or like in Richter, they can build up all this area, but they give back up a square to the public. That makes it let's say adds to the community, and this let's say like a stone in the water, it starts sparkles and can affect how we let's say how we came to this building, and how the neighborhood will let's say develop and
the
behave.
Community
And the community, and exactly that's how the community can develop from it, and it evokes more development from others. It gives a good example.
I think from us to answer a little bit differently, I think for me, or at least in our work, one of the main themes, I mean, whether it's public or private, but what we want to include to make a project feel more public, is some kind of like social space. So whether it's like the stairways that are meeting, or like the big lobby or the plaza, that somehow this like human to human connection is kind of like the main key. So I think that when we're doing public projects, but everything that we want to somehow give a public perspective on, or something, for me it's like this social space, whether it's a small moment, the stairs and the lobby of this office are kind of good example, or a museum which can have maybe a big open amphitheater, or I don't know what, but somehow this kind of like person to person connection. So I think that's kind of like, for me, not on an architectural level or kind of like sculptural level, but kind of down to the basics of the human level and the city and the buildings. That's like kind of what we would try to do.
Let you in and connect. Or
to make a place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this human to human kind of opportunities. Yeah.
Not to make space, but to make place. Andras, Zoltán, thank you so much for the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and I hope to see you soon in Belgrade and continue this discussion.
Yeah, hope to see you at the EXPO. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.